This is essentially the one-year anniversary of when Joint Finance took that shameful action just before the holiday weekend to attempt to essentially deny the public the open records that their taxpayers' dollars pay to create and to retain. And subsequent to that, we have seen other efforts that have been made that are equally as troubling, from the administrative group that came together to try and ban transient records that I think has really denied the public the ability to get text messages and other kinds of information that I think are really critical to the situation that we've been investigating for about a year now in terms of WEDC. We, at this point, are calling upon the governor to finally, according to what he proposed in March, the spirit of releasing records. We have people who have been waiting, in our case with WEDC, for over a year, over 1 year, to receive records in terms of loans that were provided or grants that had no type of public review by the board or by the staff that's responsible for that. We know that for months, advocates have been waiting for records on long-term care. We know that for months, we've been waiting for corrections records. In March, the governor had come out with a big pronouncement, the spirit of which is that he was going to start to ask his administration to release records far more promptly. That has not been honored. Republicans in power have rushed through major policy changes to remove the checks and balances that prevent corruption in state government. They've opened the door to cronyism and corruption through campaign finance laws, through eliminating the GAB, through eliminating John Doe's just for political crimes, not for all other citizens in the state, and through gutting civil service. These are serious situations that make us ask, what are they trying to hide? And why is it that we are still waiting for such a prolonged period of time to have these records released? I'm going to turn it over at this juncture to our caucus chair, Representative JoCasta Zamarripa, who is going to cover a series of things that we have learned as a result of the open records that were finally required to be turned over, some by court edict. Representative Zamarripa.
Thank you, Representative. When we look at these things that we've learned through the open records process, it makes clear why Republicans wanted to gut this law. Things like the Wisconsin idea. Through emails that were finally released through a court order, we learned that Governor Walker misled the public about the changes he sought to one of our states and our UW's governing principles, the Wisconsin idea. Governor Walker claimed over and over again that the changes to the Wisconsin idea were due to a drafting error, but records show that the governor's office were well aware of the changes and they wanted the Wisconsin idea changed. Because of the open records law, the press, we the public were able to find that out. WEDC, the notorious Maserati story. The state jobs agency, WEDC, Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, has been fraught with potential corruption and controversy, as you know. Due to the open records law, we learned last June that at the urging of a top Walker official, WEDC continued to pursue giving economic development assistance to a business owner, even after they learned that he had promised state loan money to pay off the lease on his Maserati and other luxury cars. The redistricting secrecy oath. When I was but a freshman in 2011, after Republicans were forced by federal court to turn over secret documents, the public learned that Republican lawmakers signed a secrecy oath to not talk to their constituents or any member of the public about redistricting and their maps. Republican lawmakers were given secret instructions in private, signed and told to keep it from the public, and were told in instructions from their leaders, quote, "Public comments on this map may be different than what you hear in this room. Ignore the public comments," unquote. And finally, the mining bill. We know from legislative drafting records the mining company, Gogebic Taconite, was given a role in writing a mining bill regulating its business activities before that bill came before the legislature in 2013. What we found out more than a year later through the John Doe records release was that GTAC gave $700,000 to the Wisconsin Club for Growth in 2011-2012 to bankroll Governor Walker's recall campaign. That donation and the resulting law change raises suspicions on pay-to-play in our capital. So these are just 4 of the many revelations, big and small, that lawmakers, the courts, the press have unveiled through various open records processes. These findings are embarrassing to the party in power, Republicans, for good reason. They show a pattern of abusing power, misleading the public, and hiding the intention of Republican lawmakers from public scrutiny. To speak more about that is our Assistant Democratic Leader, Katrina Shankland.
Thank you. So despite Governor Walker's recent PR stunt that claimed he has implemented new public records processes, his administration is still withholding public records on several key issues. So one of the biggest ones is corrections. The Walker administration is withholding and delaying the release of Department of Corrections records that could shed light on the ongoing problems that are very serious at our state's juvenile prisons and other institutions. The information withheld ranges from basic emails to video footage of an inmate who died. WEDC. In addition, we have the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. More than a year ago, Representative Barca, who serves on the WEDC board, requested information about all WEDC awards made without a formal review. Our state jobs agency still has not provided all of those records to Representative Barca's office. What are they hiding? Long-term care changes. So a long-term care advocate in Wisconsin has been requesting records on the proposed long-term care changes since March 2015. The Walker administration, DOA, withheld those records, claiming they were part of a, quote, deliberative process. Those records still have not been released, despite a court ruling ordering similar records to be released, and the Department of Health Services having backtracked on their long-term care changes. So just 3 examples of a troubling pattern of withholding documents. This session, instead of working on policy like rebuilding the middle class, creating jobs, creating economic opportunity for working families and helping them get ahead, we saw instead majority Republicans conducting a coordinated and lengthy legislative effort to chip away at Wisconsin's tradition of open and unbiased government. Considered individually, these proposals seem like bad government, but considered together as a comprehensive legislative package, we saw a clear pattern of attempting to make it even easier to cover up waste, fraud, abuse, and even corruption. This session, Republicans continued their pattern of abusing their power and changing the law purely for their own partisan political gain. From dismantling the Nonpartisan Government Accountability Board, may it rest in peace, to gutting our state's civil service protections and opening the door to even more money in politics and elections through major campaign finance law changes. They even made political crimes exempt from John Doe investigations. With this agenda in mind, it's no wonder that the nonpartisan Brennan Center for Justice said that changes in the Republican campaign finance bill, AB 387, would, quote, transform Wisconsin's political system from one of the most open and transparent in the nation to one of the least, end quote. Democrats, on the other hand, put forward a strong anti-corruption agenda to enshrine in our state constitution the right to access open records and have open meetings. It's clear that the people of Wisconsin overwhelmingly support clean government that's accountable and accessible. It's time for every legislator, not just Democrats, to support transparent government and for the Walker administration to release its records. And now, Representative Barca.
We'll just close by saying that I think one of the most important values that we have in Wisconsin is clean, open, and transparent government. And the Wisconsin Republicans, unfortunately, have been trampling on that value and that tradition that we have in this state. I wish I could say it was over, but obviously it's not over. I mean, a year ago we saw that significant attack underway. I think they came back in then to redo it in the Finance Committee. I think it was a year ago yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. But you know, following that, last September, despite the large public outcry, the Assembly Republican leadership continued to try to weaken open records laws, so they were only subject to legislative rules. Governor Walker and the Republican legislators used a little-known group called the Public Records Board to restrict access to open records law. Now again, because of the public outcry, because legislative Democrats and the public, and the press, frankly, in this case, called out how wrong that is and how far astray that is from our values, that was reversed. But Republicans continue to find loopholes and excuses, as we indicated in a number of examples here, where they continue to have these prolonged delays in releasing public records, some of which I don't know if we'll ever actually have access to, which is very troubling. So there's two things that we're calling on today. One is we're saying that take up those constitutional amendments that we brought forward. We would like the Republicans to take action. We would like the public to continue to put pressure on the Republicans. We need constitutional protections for the people of this state to have access to open records and to ensure that open meetings laws are followed. We saw in both cases how quickly that can be taken away. The open meetings law, it said in the preamble to hold the legislature accountable, but unfortunately our Supreme Court chose to do something different. The only way around that is to have a constitutional amendment. On open records, we saw just 1 year ago today how quickly we can lose that. That's why you need a constitutional amendment. So it's outside of the control of Republicans taking these last minute, midnight kind of motions to take away that authority. That is the only way the public can be assured that their rights will be protected. Secondly, we urge public and media outlets to continue to hold Republican legislators accountable and to call upon them, especially the governor in this case, who last March put out a new edict saying that they were going to more immediately release records. And here we are over a year later in the case of WEDC, months later in the case of the long-term care requests that have been put forward, and months later in terms of corrections with very important records that we saw over the holiday weekend again. More circumstances that have come up that we were unaware of. Government is best when it's close to the people, responsive to their needs, and when the public can hold people accountable, and that can only happen when you have open, clean, and transparent government. With that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
How about the process, Peter? How do you make it happen? How do you get the referendum started? How do you get the constitutional amendment started?
Well, it's very difficult, obviously, because unfortunately the legislative Republicans have shown a trend to go the opposite direction in what they've done legislatively. So to have them reverse course now, I think it takes a public outcry. I think it takes during the election cycle that's going on for the public to bring this up, to say that we expect people to honor the traditions and the values of this state, which is clean, open, and transparent government. We'll be crisscrossing the state talking about those issues as part of so many issues that will come up in this campaign, but it's one of the most important ones because it underscores all of the various issues. Because if you can't know what your government is up to, then it's very hard to hold them accountable and to make sure that they're following the edicts that the people have.
Representative, on the WEDC, Citizen Action filed an open records request on the 30-day prior notification that was adopted by the board 2 years ago in 2014, and found that WEDC had none of those notifications on file from firms that were receiving WEDC funding and were either outsourcing or scaling back on jobs created. Any response to that?
Well, I give them credit for doing that research and for being able to uncover that information. We've been continually bringing this issue up on the board of directors. Senator Lassa and I, who serve on the board, have brought up motions at various times to try to make sure that, in fact, we have that type of accountability for taxpayer dollars without success. We've tried in the legislature. We've had bills to try and accomplish similar goals. And so it's a very important issue. I think the public cares deeply about it. And I applaud them for their action to release this report. And we've now asked, Senator Lassa and I have made the request that in our meeting in Stevens Point coming up in the next, I don't know if it's next week or the week after, but that this be on the agenda. So I certainly hope that the CEO of WEDC and the chairman of the board will honor that request so we can bring this issue up. It's a very important one to the public.
Why hasn't WEDC acted on that, though, if the board put that in place or wanted it put in place in 2014? I mean, is WEDC staff taking board resolutions as recommendations rather than requirements?
Well, unfortunately, we've seen in a number of instances where that's been the case. That's the Legislative Audit Committee has done some tremendous work in terms of the annual audits that they put forward. And hopefully in this meeting, we can get to the bottom of that and ensure that it's very clear what the expectations of the board are. But, you know, I'll remind you that the board itself passed unanimously that the CEO should be reporting to the board and be held accountable. We should hire and fire the CEO of the company, as most boards do. Unfortunately, despite passing that unanimously, the Republicans in the legislature refused to pass the bill. So, you know, you've got, I think they look to the Republicans in the legislature, and I think they feel they're going to get a pass. And that's unfortunate. It's our job as a legislative body to hold the executive branch accountable. And the Republican legislature simply will not do that. On virtually any issue. Corrections is another issue. We've called repeatedly. Our committees have, the leadership has, to have hearings on the serious situations going on in our Department of Corrections. And the standing committees refuse to have hearings. You know, the Assembly Republicans have been dysfunctional in terms of, and just totally unaccountable and unresponsive to the need to hold the executive branch accountable. So I think when the executive branch sees that, and leaders within departments know that they're given a pass and that they're not going to be held to account and to come before the respective committees, they're less likely then to follow through because they know the consequences are not there.
Are there particular changes or things that you expect or afraid Republicans are going to introduce in the upcoming session?
Well, I worry, and maybe one of my colleagues might want to answer this, and I appreciate Representative Considine being here too. He's also a strong believer in clean, open, and transparent government. We fear that there'll be more attempts made in this coming session of the legislature to continue down this same path of trampling on, you know, on clean, open, and transparent government. I mean, I stated, and it really was not meant to be hyperbole. I believe the era of clean, open, and transparent government in Wisconsin is over. Now, we're going to fight every day to try and restore that, but that should be troubling to citizens. When you know, political corruption is not something that's subject to a John Doe, but something a nonprofit might do or a business leader might do is subject to John Doe. That should be very troubling and chilling, frankly, for the public to know that. And so many of the other actions that have been taken, our campaign finance laws, where there's less transparency. You know, the Brennan Center, as Representative Shankland alluded to, said we've gone, you know, from having one of the most transparent finance systems to one of the least. Those are things that should trouble Wisconsinites. It troubles me as somebody that grew up and was always proud of our state. And I fear we're going completely in the wrong direction. And I think we're going to pay consequences for years to come until we're able to reverse this. And that's why we're having this press conference, because we think the public needs to know all the things that are going on. Because as Representative Shankland indicated, there's a pattern. It's not just in isolation you look and you think, oh boy, I can't believe they're doing that. But when you look at the pattern of all of these actions, you know, we are going down a very troubling path that is going to lead to serious problems in this state, I predict, in years to come. Anybody else want to add anything?
I'll just add that during this legislative session, as we debated open records, Assembly Democrats did introduce a resolution and bring it to the floor calling for committing to and recommitting to open and clean government. And that led to a floor debate in which several Assembly Republicans defended the, quote, need to take away access to open records, and citing things like constituent privacy. So they essentially doubled down on open records, one of whom was on the Joint Finance Committee and voted to take access away. And we also learned through open records requests that the media did that the open records change was coordinated between both houses and the governor's office. And I would not discount the possibility of that coming up again as a result, just knowing that leaders, Republican leaders in both houses and the governor coordinated that effort. So one of my biggest fears for next session is that in another omnibus motion in the budget or at another late night on a floor session, access to open records, to our citizens and taxpayer dollars, access gets taken away in one fell swoop. So I think we do need to worry. I think in this case it's constant vigilance, and it's only because of swift media scrutiny and public pressure that the open records changes in the budget that Republicans voted for were reversed. So I hope that the pressure stays on.
Anything else? Otherwise, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.